In the first picture we see a girl writing a letter to her dear gentleman named her, also mentioning that it's been a while since she took up the pen. The girl says that there is something important she would like to tell you about, and it concerns her relationship with her. Looking at the flowers, the pink-haired girl with the quill in her hands pondered whether it was right to share this, which she was not sure of yet, according to her own words. She doesn't know where to start, thinking a good place to start might be the moment she was born. She says it may seem absurd to think that she's not writing about something grandiose. We see a picture of a young man in beautiful clothes and a girl saying she's special after all. We see a bookstore with a crowd of girls, one of whom asks in surprise if the book she wants is really out of stock. The bookseller replies that The Little Mermaid was sold out before it arrived in the store, and if she wants to buy a book by this author, she has to pre-order it, otherwise, she will be left with a nose. The girl asks the seller when it is necessary to make this very pre-order of the book, to which the seller says that it should be done a month before the release of the book, or even at the time of writing the work. The girl stares out the window, thinking that every time she listens to the conversations on the street, she hears people sharing their impressions of the book with each other. The happy girl hears different lines, people talk to each other, people ask each other if they've read Jella's new work, another person asks if it's about The Little Mermaid because it was read right after it was released, to which he gets an answer if he's read The Little Mermaid. Next we see the story of the book she wrote. This time the girl decided to tell people another tale she loves immensely. And then we can see her very angry because she hasn't slept for several nights, and she hasn't even washed her hair, and she still can't concentrate. The girl touches her hair and says that if it's gonna be done, it's gotta be done. Turns out the girl touched her hair with a magic wand, and she looks very happy. The girl says magic is a handy thing, and she only uses it to get her hair clean and print out her manuscripts. A motivated Jella says she'll do better with a fresh head, so she decides to get her head together and get back to work, while being hugely motivated to write another bestseller. A guy walks into the girl's room, then a disgruntled Jella asks the guy what's wrong and tells him that if he's here for something trivial, he shouldn't make her office a thoroughfare. The guy says he just thought she should know that Thumbelina, published last month, ranked second in total sales of their published books. The girl immediately gets up from her chair and asks the guy in surprise what he said. The kid hands her some sheets and tells her to look for herself, saying that he thinks the author is writing under a pseudonym, and apparently he dares to assume that the author is a newcomer. Jella thought her book would hold the #1 spot for at least 3 months like the Snow Queen. And then she asks, surprised and a little sad, which novel was better than her little girl. Looking at the sheets given by the boy, she sees that she is in first place as the book The King's New Dress, wondering if this information is reliable, mentioning that there is no such thing. The guy says it was written in today's paper, so it's probably true, which Jella reacts aggressively and says she has to see for herself. The girl asks herself who the hell wrote this, saying The King's New Dress is nonsense, and not believing her eyes. At Jella's bookstore saw a poster of the book The King's New Dress. The girl looks at this poster and asks where Thumbelina has gone, and why is this one hanging in its place. The girl thinks the content must surely be different. They say it must be different. After finding the book, the girl puts her hand on it, but suddenly some guy puts his hand on hers. The girl is incredibly pissed off and immediately shrieks that she found the book first. When she sees the guy who put his hand on her arm, she asks herself who is this stunningly handsome guy. The embarrassed guy turns around to apologize to the girl and immediately decides to leave. The girl thinks to herself that he's very handsome after all. Jella looks thoughtfully at the book and immediately sees that the author of this book is a certain her. The girl says the author has a funny name and opens the book to read it. After reading a few lines, she cannot believe it, because the author's literary style and narration is excellent, thinking that he is definitely not a novice. But she's more concerned about the fact that there's one other person in this world who knows the tale. A guy asks a girl what she can't believe, asking if the plot is predictable. The girl replies to the guy that it is strange that the king took the word of some deceivers. After all, some dimwits talk about transparent things that did not exist at all. The girl thinks that it is drawn by the ears. The guy thoughtfully listens to her. She also says that no one asked questions when the king went out naked, and when the child said so, there was mockery everywhere. The girl says that in any case this novel well in no way pulls on the first place. For her it is obvious that the author attracted acquaintances or set up the so-called excitement to increase sales of his book, to which the guy says that there was no such thing. On automatic, she says she didn't think he'd have a different opinion, But then she realizes the guy does have a different opinion. He says he didn't resort to any tricks or asked acquaintances to buy his books. Thus we realize that he is the same Der, also saying that her speculation embarrassed him. She asks him if his name is Der by any chance, and asks him if that simple peanut-like name belongs to him. The ironically annoyed guy says it's a nickname he came up with while eating peanuts, irritatedly reminding her that she said his name was as simple as peanuts. Jella says she doesn't care if his name is Peanut or Der, she's more interested in his true identity. A guy tells a girl his real last name is Anderson. Jella first says she doesn't care what his last name is, but then, as if beginning to glow, she asks him his last name, repeating the word Anderson. Der standing next to the girl calling his full name is Hans Christian Andersen. The girl is very surprised to see the guy asking if he's the same Anderson. A mother is reading her daughter a fairy tale about the ugly duckling. Already finishing her reading, the girl asks her mother to read her another fairy tale, namely The Little Mermaid. The mother asks a little irritably if girls really like fairy tales so much, to which the cheerful girl replies that she likes fairy tales very much. Around her daughter's mother there are 3 more books. The mother agrees to read the girl one more story. The girl is happy and says that she loves it when her mother reads her stories. Apparently this girl turns out to be jealous. She says that reading fairy tales was her favorite thing to do as a child, and maybe that's why she dreamed that one day her family would also live happily ever after, just like in fairy tales. But the girl's dream didn't come true because her parents had to live with her mom. She spent most of her time alone, reading a lot of books. As the girl grew older she naturally remembered them much less often. But suddenly at one point her mom soon postponed passing away. That was the reason for her return to long-forgotten fairy tales. Opening the book chest she was surprised to find that one of her favorite childhood books was still there. She looks at the book and remembers that she used to reread it often as a child because she liked it so much. Recalling how happy she was to read these tales, she mentions that these tales are nothing like modern fairy tales, and yet they made her reality so much happier, if only for a little while. She hugs this book and mentions that they were her most prized possession. Nowadays the girl is very much surprised to see the same Anderson, saying it's just not possible. A young guy asks her without emotion if she still can't believe it. Jella says it's all a lie and screams and starts running away from the place where she was talking to Anderson. The young writer clutched his head and said he understood absolutely nothing of what had happened. A girl hugging a pillow and being sad, thinking about how she ran away like a fool. She analyzes what happened, wondering what they have now, a familiar story and a famous author whose name is Hans Christian Andersen. Jella thinks something doesn't add up, because how can that pretty face turn into an old grandfather? I noticed that in reality he had a lot less hair. She got out of bed. She figured she shouldn't jump to conclusions, and maybe it's not what she thinks it is. Though if he's not the real Anderson, this story couldn't have come from the ceiling anyway. The girl hugs her pillow thoughtfully. She decides she's not going to make it up, and the easiest thing to do is to go and ask me, which she decides to do. But then she asks herself, where does he live? All she knows is his name is Hans Christian Andersen. And then this guy walks into the room and asks her if she knows a random person named Hans Christian Andersen. The boy replies that it seems this young man belongs to the Croft family, and he's heard of it. The girl is surprised that he belongs to the Earl's family. I am surprised that he is not the son of a shoemaker, while noting that he looked very noble. Over a mug of tea, she wonders if this is the Anderson she knows or another man who, like her, has been reborn in this reality. The writer thanks the guy and says she'll write a message and come back, and he'll have to send it to Count Anderson. The guy says he'll do it, and the writer tells him he's helping her out as always. The girl is very glad that she can meet him again and that she will soon find out everything. The Count has a very beautiful castle in his possession. Hans Christian Andersen stares out the window over a mug of hot tea, not understanding why he's chilly. Then someone calls him and tells him there's a letter, to which he's surprised and asks for the letter. Sitting in a cafe, the writer thinks she's sent him a message. Once he reads it, he can't help but come, so she just has to wait for the Count. The girl is excited. She's thinking about what she'll tell him, and what she'll ask him when the Count shows up. The first questions that came to her mind were whether he knew about smartphones and whether he knew about Webtoon. For those who don't know, Webtoon is a popular Korean manhwa reading offering. Thinking that it would be funny, of course, if he answered that he didn't know. The Count comes to the cafe and the girl thinks what will happen if he turns out to be that Anders. And what then to be? Hans Christian Andersen approaches a table where a girl is sitting. She immediately stands up and greets him with a slight tilt of her head, To which the guy says here they meet again. The girl is thinking about her first plan, which is to see if he is a time traveler like her, and if so, hire him as an employee at a publishing house. And she's also thinking about her second plan, which she doesn't really believe in, which is that if he turns out to be the real Anderson, which is more of a delusion than she thinks, she'll fire the clapper first, and then hire him. The girl turns to the waitress and tells her to bring them their food in 10 minutes. The waitress dutifully says she understands. Sitting at the table, Hans Christian Andersen says that he has received a letter from her with unceremonious content, to which the girl is a little embarrassed and asks in what sense. The Count clarifies why he thinks the letter is uncourteous, saying that she made the appointment without consulting him and did not include the sender's address so that a rejection could not be sent. When the servants saw Jella's name on the envelope, they squealed with joy. Recognizing her as a famous writer, she made the Count have no choice but to come to the cafe. The cheerful girl says that if she had sent the letter under a pseudonym, it probably wouldn't have reached him. I also asked the Count if his family doesn't know he's a writer. Hans Christian Andersen insinuates that his family knows nothing about his writing. They don't because he was born into a family of knights, which is not a very common occupation for them. The writer says she was very rude last time, and she would like to apologize for running away from the Count out of the blue. The Count says that everything is fine and he understands why she suddenly wanted to run away, because she cruelly criticized the author of the work without knowing that he is standing right in front of her. The writer remarks that she'd be interested to know something, so she arranged this meeting with him. The hand on the arm girl asks if Hans Christian Andersen remembers his past life. Immediately her aura of calmness broke, and she started making excuses that it was just a joke, saying that she actually wanted to ask a couple questions about his piece. The writer asks how he came up with this story, but that the Count replies that it is already very much like an interrogation, or is he mistaken about something. The writer replies that his assumption is correct, calling him Mr. Christian. The Count immediately says that Christian is his baptismal name, and asks to be called Hans. Then instead of answering, Hans Christian Andersen says why doesn't she first tell the story of how the little mermaid she wrote was born. Think of it as a very entertaining piece of writing. The writer says she just combined rumors and her idea of mermaids, mentioning that this is a tale of a mermaid who falls in love with a human at first sight. Hans Christian Andersen says that the writer has a terrific imagination, but she's a little annoyed and says it's his turn, insistently asking where he heard the story of the king. The Count replies that his tale is not based on stereotypes and misrepresentations. He merely described an incident he witnessed himself. Furious, the writer accuses the Count of lying, asking how such a thing could ever really happen. Hans Christian Andersen nonchalantly replies that believe it or not it's her choice, but this story was real. The Count begins to tell the story of this work. It turns out that it happened when he was studying at the academy. A smart guy from the Ministry of Magic who was his age claimed that he managed to sew a transparent garment. His peer insisted that only smart people could see it. Krall says he wasn't interested in the gossip. He had no interest in finding out if it was true. But even the teachers at the ministry praised the clothes. As a result, the director of the academy himself said that he did not see this marvelous outfit, and all the noise raised around it immediately quieted down. Everyone fell for one man's joke. The Count says it's called crowd psychology, because it's hard to go against a large number of people when they're of one mind. This story is the basis of the story. The Count remembered it when he was snacking on peanuts to kill time. Asked the writer a closed question. She immediately realizes that he had a bad feeling about the peanuts. The writer thinks it sounds too plausible, and the Count's face doesn't look like he's lying. Then the girl asks if he's thinking up a plot for a new book, to which Hans Christian Andersen answers with a question, asking why she's asking him that question. The happy writer thinks the Count must have no children lately. The writer says she didn't intend to steal anything. She just has to be sure of something. To which the Count asks the logical question of what she has to be sure of. The Count says she has it all written on her face, and the writer suggests that he criticize people, not writers, looking at their facial expressions. The Count says there are many things he's good at, and he has an idea for a new story. He recalls that it was the winter before last. He was walking through the square, and his eye was caught by a girl selling something. The writer is very surprised. The Count continues his story, and the next day he found her dead body in the snow. He felt sorry for her. He thought that maybe if he had bought something from the girl he could have saved her life and things would have turned out differently. A smile froze on the girl's face, and the Count had a very interesting thought. He thought that if she smiled till she died, She must be thinking of the happy memories that had once given her joy. He said he planned to write the story when he had time, and before he could finish his thought he saw the girl's confused face wondering what was going on. The writer is naturally very surprised to find that this is the real Hans Christian Andersen. That's when the writer realizes that Hans Christian Andersen is telling a story about a girl with matches. Jella gives the reason why she especially loved Andersen's fairy tales and set them apart from the infinite number of others. All because his warmth and unique perspective on sad and tragic stories was truly beautiful. Then she realizes that the man who wrote many of her favorite works is sitting right across from her. The writer realizes who is really standing in front of her and lowers her head in front of the Count, and tells him that she was very careless in her words while asking for forgiveness. Hans Christian Andersen is puzzled. He asks why her behavior has suddenly changed. She says it's because she's excited and she's madly enjoying the story he's just told. Well, the Count objects to our writer because first she thought his work was nonsense, and now she expresses admiration. To which the writer replies that of course she likes his work so much she can't find the words, as well as telling him that he's a master of his craft. The desk writer approaches Hans Christian Andersen and asks if he would like to sign a contract with her. The persistent writer says that as director of the publishing house she wants to hire the Count, and she will make sure that his name is widely known throughout the mainland. But immediately the Count refuses her offer, arguing that he does not want to make writing his main job, and if his family finds out about his hobby he will be in trouble. And the second reason is that he does not want to sign a contract with a publishing house. Jella is a little surprised and tells him that he did, after all, publish that very book, The King's New Dress. The Count tells her that he just wanted to get his book out once, so he sent it to a publisher under a pseudonym. Surprised writer asks him about profit, to which he replies with an unchanged expression that he is not interested in profit. The writer tells Earl to keep writing under a pseudonym because she, for example, also shortened her name Angela to the pseudonym Jella. The Count realizes her name is Angela and tells the writer that from now on he will throw out all letters that are signed with the names Angela or Jella. The writer is very much surprised and questions the Count, to which he replies, a little angrily, that if she sends him one more letter he will close the doors of her publishing house forever. Jella tells the Count that he dare not. The Count replies that if she wants to check it out, she should let him, also telling her to erase his name from her memory, while mentioning that he will look forward to the publication of her new works only as a reader. The remaining one writer brings the food. The waitress says that when she rings the bell they will bring the next course, to which the writer replies let them bring everything at once and dessert too. The writer eats, but she is also very angry, remembering Hans Christian Andersen's words that he will shut down her publishing house, while asking herself who he thinks he is. But still, after she met Andersen herself, she can't let him go. Jella says there are many more stories she would like to tell people, mentioning that Mr. Andersen will see for himself that it is not his destiny to swing a sword, for he was born to hold a pen and click the keys of a typewriter. A few days later, in the kingdom of Yerevan, rumors that the publishing house under the name of Angela's Story would soon release a new novel spread across the country at the speed of light. The writer says that as she thought rumors are always quick to spread, they worked on this Roman day and night, but the results should buy all their efforts. For the sake of this day, the writer bought a dress from the best dressmaker in the kingdom named Sharvina, because in her opinion, this event was worth preparing for it to the fullest. A stately woman is approached by her butler, and told that Mrs. Jella has arrived, to which the woman tells the writer to hurry up and pass on. The writer in a beautiful outfit greets the woman, and here we can recognize that the woman is Countess Andersen. The writer introduces herself as Jella and thanks the woman for agreeing to meet her. Countess Andersen replies that she couldn't pass up the chance to meet the famous writer, telling her to make herself comfortable. The writer notices that the others are staring at her shamelessly. All of Countess Andersen's servants are surprised to see the very famous writer. Jella understands why they're surprised, because she thinks they shouldn't be surprised to see her because there's a lot of gossip about Jella, and she's just shown up. Over a mug of tea, the Countess says that she was very surprised when she received a letter from the writer herself, and at first she didn't believe that she had received a message from Jella herself. But after she sent the Countess a new book with her signature, the Countess became convinced that she was talking to a real writer. The writer says she has never revealed her real name or shown her face, so there are plenty of people who impersonate her. The Countess concludes from what she has heard that the writer is going to make her name public, and to be sure she asks her if she is going to make her name public. To which the writer replies that she only did it to meet the Countess, and that her name will remain as secret to the rest of us as it was before. The Countess says that rumors are already spreading just because of her visit to her, to which the imperturbable writer replies that everything is fine, and to get something valuable she can survive it. Taking a mug of tea, the Countess says that when she was thinking about the reason for the writer's desire to see her, the butler told her that they had once exchanged letters with her son, who is Hans Christian Andersen. The Countess asks if the writer knows him. Jella says they ran into each other once by chance on the street, and asks the Countess if she's ever heard of the tale of the king's new dress, to which the Countess says she's heard something about it. Angela says that she, being the director of a publishing house, wants to hire the author of this work, obviously alluding to Hans. She says that their next book is the starting point, but there is one problem. The Countess asks if it has anything to do with her son Hans. Well, the writer replies that the author under the pseudonym Der asked Hans Christian Andersen for advice on writing this very book. The Countess is very much surprised, saying that her son is not interested in anything like that, and that he likes fencing. The writer is a little shocked to think how much more he's hiding from his family. The writer asks the Countess if she has read the passage she sent with the letter, mentioning that Mr. Der wrote the story based on an incident that once happened to Hans Christian Andersen. The surprised Countess tries to understand what the author of this book wants, but the writer doesn't let her finish her thought, and says that the writer wants to talk to her son from time to time. Jella says that Count Hans Christian Andersen will only have to come to their publishing house for an hour or so for tea, which he steadfastly refuses to do. Countess says her son Hans is not such a heartless boy at all and doesn't understand why he behaved this way, while telling the writer not to cry. Jella says that she actually guessed the reason for his refusal, because with her servant he said he was afraid his family wouldn't like it. The Countess is very surprised, but the writer says he said that if he became a writer, his relatives would never understand him. The Countess gets up from the table and apologizes to Jella and says she will need to step away for a moment, to which she replies that it's okay and she can wait. Hans Christian Andersen is reading a book called The Girl with Matches. When he reads the author's name, he sees that the name Der. His mother comes into his room. She tells Hans Christian Andersen that she has spoken to Mrs. Jella, and asks if it's true he thought they would oppose his passion and that's why he turned down her offer. Hans doesn't know what he's talking about, but he knows it's about the same writer he met. His mother tells him what family opinion matters when it comes to helping people. After all, a nobleman, much less a knight, should not refuse such a small request. His mother supports him and says that with his talents, he'll do fine, sending him outside to talk to the writer, since she's already waiting for him. The Count approaches the table where Jella is sitting in a very handsome garb, wondering what she said to his mother. A happy meeting, and the writer tells the Count that they have not seen each other for a long time, while asking him how he is doing. The Count starts talking straight to the point, mentioning that he said he had absolutely no desire to become a writer, showing the writer a book on the very story he's talking about, asks her what it is and then says he warned her about it. The writer tells the Count that the book doesn't have his name on it, but he looks very angry after the comma and tries to address her and calls her Milady. But the writer interrupts him and says he can call her Angela or Jella. Just trying to say something, the Count interrupts the writer again, and says that she doesn't think that coming to the publishing house every day is a good idea as there are a lot of prying eyes. Maybe then she'll visit him, or they'll meet on neutral territory. The Count doesn't understand anything, and then the writer tells him that it looks like his mother didn't explain anything to him either. First of all, she decides to apologize for printing the book without his knowledge because after the threats she had no choice but to do so. So she asks the Count for permission to tell him her plans. The plan is for Andersen to be the man who just talks to a writer named Der and inspires him. So she's going to keep the Count's identity a secret so he can write without any problems. She says that of course she wanted to keep Hans Christian Andersen's first name in the book, but published it under his pseudonym. And now he can write whenever he likes. Put his hand over his face, and annoyed Hans mentions that the writer is pretty stubborn and asks what she's up to. The woman, with eyes filled with happiness, replied that it was because she saw talent in Ganta, and she wrote a story based on an incident he mentioned in passing, and he may think she's shameless. But she still wants to tell the world his story anyway. He doesn't understand what the hell she knows about him to say that, and he didn't look as annoyed and pessimistic as he used to. The writer says that as she was typing she imagined him telling the story and her heart almost jumped out of her chest. His ability to turn everyday life into a story amazes her. The Count interrupts her by calling her Mrs. Jella, but the angry writer asks why he called her that, because she thought her heart was going to stop, asking him to just call her by her first name. Hans Christian Andersen says he heard something from his mother. She told him she was going to stop writing. He says all right, nobody cares if he writes or not, but for a real writer to quit is very strange. But even if it is the way it's presented, the Count still doesn't want to commit his life to writing. The writer says that's why she's persuading the Count, because she wants to show her true intentions. But he thoughtfully asks why he can't help thinking that there's some other reason for her passionate desire to make him write. Because there must be something that caused him to give up his own craft. Jella says she's doing it for him, but she still doesn't understand what he wants to achieve. Maybe he's probing the ground, which is what the writer was thinking when she talked to Hans Christian Andersen. She thought that if she could persuade the Countess, everything would go smoothly. But their conversation took a strange turn at once. She kept trying to argue to persuade Hans Christian Andersen, but he wouldn't even listen to her idea and agreed. The Count says his mother told him the same thing, so he has no reason to refuse. He asks if it's true that all he has to do is just show up to see them, because if you think about it, it's not a difficult job, just to see them from time to time and enjoy a cup of tea. Immediately the writer jumped up from her seat, telling the Count that he would not regret it at all, and suggesting that he make the contract right away. The writer conjures up her contract with a magic wand, then the surprised Count asks if she's magic, to which she replies that it's no big deal, as it's nothing special. Thinks and the Count such skills are similar to the skills of sorcerers that have been practiced for years. The palace mages began to whip out thunder and lightning bolts. He says he thinks it would have been better if she had trained professionally in magic, and then joined the ministry of the imperial court instead of becoming the director of a publishing house. The embarrassed writer says she's not that skilled a magician and she never even thought of taking it on. But now she has better things to do because there's no turning back. We see a frustrated writer at the publisher's office. She asks what's impossible. It's a clear breach of contract. She mentions that he'll drive her crazy, and that she won't be coddled. She says she's waiting for a guy, but doesn't mention his name, saying instead that his name is Bag of Stories. Her assistants are asking her if she's sick, because it's been 3 days since she's done anything. She's always been incredibly busy, and now all of a sudden she's not doing anything. He's worried about her. An irritated Jella tells him not to worry because she'll never close the publishing house, to which the assistant replies that thank God. The assistant also tells her that her book has caused a public outcry because aristocrats and ordinary people reacted very differently to it. Jella asks in what sense, and immediately her assistant explains to her something of this. All the published stories were close to people of noble birth, but to the others they were like an unattainable dream, and the recently written tales showed them unrealistic. According to them, it leaves an odd impression. The surprised writer says that The Girl with the Matches is a story that reflects the life of ordinary people. Why it has aroused public interest. Her assistant says that it is because it is different from previous works. Most of the protagonists in her past stories were of high status, but the protagonist of this work belongs to a disadvantaged section of society, demonstrating what a miserable life such people can have. Her assistant believes that sympathizing with the protagonist has led readers to feel sorry for themselves. Jella is very surprised because it's only a short story. The writer thinks that being reborn in this place, she never felt much difference between people's position in society, so she never thought she would get such a reaction. A fairy tale with a sense of the difference between reality and fiction can be for someone a fun, a dream, or a reflection of his or her own life, but tells her assistant that class society is such a big headache, and he replies that she talks like she came here from another world. I also mention that in any case, there are those who love the story for that reason. So writer, don't get yourself worked up. The writer asks her assistant to bring her medicine, but he says he won't let her stay awake all night going through her thoughts. Abruptly, she jumps up and says it's okay and she's found a solution. She figures she'll have to open the story bag herself. She thinks that if the readers like the book so much, then a new one should come out as soon as possible. Her assistant says he doesn't know what she's talking about, but his workday is over, and the writer says she knows her assistant is worried about her, but she'll leave work on time today. The writer thinks that somehow this guy's stories are controversial. He even signed a contract and pretends like nothing happened. Does he think she's incapable of anything? It must be like the modern world. Apparently, he doesn't know how terrible the consequences of a breach of contract can be. Count Hans Christian Andersen is driving his carriage somewhere, but he is incredibly angry and tells the man who drives the carriage to turn it around immediately. Our writer stands in front of the Count and says she's late. But the question is why they're in this situation, and to answer that we're going to go back an hour. All the action we'll see next took place an hour earlier at the royal palace. A very beautiful palace indeed. Count Hans Christian meets our writer and tells her the only word he can use to describe her is crazy. He couldn't believe it when he heard some pink girl had come here, the guards had told him. The writer tells Hans Christian Andersen that if he had appeared even a minute later, she would have had to break into the palace. But he replies that in that case they would have met in the dungeon. Jailer Riley answers the Count with a question asking if he needs to go to jail to see her, while saying that she will mean it. But the Earl clutches his head and says there seems to be no reason for her to come to his palace. The writer is puzzled and asks herself, and he says this after signing the contract, then tells the Count that he has committed to spend a couple of hours with her under the contract. It even has his signature. She asks the Count if he realizes that he is breaking the terms of the contract. A very confident Earl responds to this attack by saying that this is only possible when he has free time. And unlike the writer, he's a terribly busy man. Jella thinks this Count is driving her crazy. But she doesn't show it, and asks him if that's why he didn't honor the contract. Jella tells Count Hans Christian Andersen that for breach of contract she has to steal him away for the whole of today. She grabs his hand. The Count doesn't understand anything and asks the writer, "What do you mean, steal?" On noticing that it's actually kidnapping, the writer takes the Count to a carriage and shoves him into it while other people are watching. The Count tells her that she is the only one who had the nerve to kidnap a royal knight right in front of the palace, to which she says that if that is so, she is kidnapping him. The two girls look at this in bewilderment, and commiserate with each other, not understanding what is going on, assuming that the cute ones must be swearing. The offended Count asks where they are going, but after a while they reach their destination and the writer asks him if he is going to get off, to which Thoth replies that this is forbidden territory, and he will never leave the crew without even looking in Jella's direction, to which the case responds by asking him if he will even come out to look at the magnificent lake on top of the icy mountain. It turns out that while she was writing her book The Snow Queen, she happened to visit the lake there, and according to her it's really amazing and the same Count will love it. But Count Hans Christian Andersen says that however the two states wish to claim the place as their own, and it was for a long time the subject of dispute and disagreement. But having concluded a truce they agreed that no one would enter the land without each other's consent. Also on the opposite bank are on duty soldiers of the state from which the Count himself is from, and here, at the entrance, are soldiers of another state. And if they are found carelessly wandering about the neighborhood, and at this point in his story the writer simply tears him out of the carriage. Sweet Angela activated her magic and used it to pull Count Hans Christian Andersen out of the carriage. She asks him why he's such a coward, but he's standing over the ground asking her what she's doing, to which she replies that she's just trying to give him a nice place to pee, for the heat seems to be bad for the Count's memory, for he's forgotten his promise, for she doesn't think he broke it on purpose, it's all her fault. It's this nasty heat. So she suggests he enjoy an ice lake and a tea party together, and talk about the next piece of writing or their future together. All this time Angela did not let him out of the air. The gameman asked a logical question how long he will hang in the air, but the writer nonchalantly answers that he will hang in the air until he stops being stubborn. And yet she thinks they need to talk about serious topics just like intellectuals. Maybe it's because he's a knight, but he has a pretty good sense of balance. The Count doesn't understand anything she says. Count Hans Christian Andersen suggests she talk right here, just don't go to that mountain. Angela thinks it's all a little strange because the guards are new here. She's sure that the last time she looked, if they were here, she would have noticed that this is the forbidden zone. Maybe they passed out in the bathroom, and at that moment, while she was thinking, Count Hans Christian Andersen snatches the magic wand out of her hand. Jealous shock turns to the Count and asks him how he got off, for he was now firmly on Earth. But he nonchalantly says it's four-circle magic. Angela took his words as a devaluation of magic. She doesn't understand what the four circles are. She just says it's the basis of all the basics. So she's self-taught. Count Hans Christian Andersen grabs the writer's hand and says he won't explain everything later. First they need to leave the forbidden zone. The writer doesn't understand what he's doing and why he's grabbing her arm, but he says he's doing about the same thing she's been doing recently. Jella says he's literally dragging her, but the nonchalant Count replies that he knew she was so smart she knew right away. The writer asks him if she says that she came with the Count, Will the guards let her in? He says that they are foreigners, but not to know the name of aristocrats is too much. The writer shrieked loudly that there was something there and ran off into the forest. Grams wasn't even going to run after her, thinking that if he didn't run after her she'd give up and go back. And he still had her magic wand, but then he realizes that for some reason he still feels like he can't let her go alone. In the Count's mind, she tells someone that Hans Christian Andersen said he'd show her around, which he can't let happen, and he thinks she was going to sell it. But then Angela comes back and tells Mr. Andersen that it's all clear. But he doesn't wash off his pessimistic mask and says that maybe they're looking for them elsewhere, and they could be back any minute. So they have to leave soon. The majestic Count Hans Christian Andersen extends his hand to Angela, and tells her to give him her hand. Angela is very excited because he called her by name for the first time. She even almost fell down, and the Count stands silently with his hand outstretched. The Count says he will call her by her first name only from now on, and Angela gives the Count her hand, even both of them. She came very close to him and said this while sipping hot tea on a mountaintop, at the same time taking back her wand from Hans Christian Andersen. She activates her magic and they take off, and there are lots of glowing blue circles and all sorts of other patterns under their feet. Hans Christian Andersen thinks she looks quite normal, and he can't believe she's wasting her talent on something like this. Behind the girl's back he asks himself, does she really want him to pee in a scenic spot, and it's only because of that. Suddenly they descend to the ground, and in bewilderment the Count asks what happened because it seems to be to the top of the mountain, and she wanted so much to get there. Not long after standing on her feet, Angela faints and falls to the ground, because of which the Count was a little frightened and very much agitated. Count Hans Christian Andersen takes Angela in his arms and asks what is happening to her. But she doesn't know, just slowly her body began to weaken and as a result she fell down. The Count tells her to breathe deeply and explains what happened to her. It turns out she used magic incorrectly, and that's what caused her body. Judging by the fact that his ring didn't work, he assumes she used magic with a power of more than 4 circles. The writer looks at the Count and asks what other circles, but he just tells her that if she's interested in the subject of magic, she should at least learn the basics. Angela says that she knows how to use ordinary magic, just bought a wand to be able to print several books at the same time. Of course she does not know about any circles. According to the Count, it is better not to say such things to other magicians. He tells Angela that it's better to end their journey and go down if they stay here for too long, but Angela is not very happy about this coincidence, because he hasn't looked at the ice lake yet. The Count bows down and offers Angela another chance to discuss the terms of their agreement, this time more seriously. Angela jumped up and asked the Count if he really wasn't deceiving her, but what he said was that she was deceiving him. But anyway, since they've gotten this far, they need to talk about it in detail. The writer suggests that in that case he should go up to the lake and talk there, to which the Count immediately objects and suggests that she should talk better in her publisher's office, saying at the same time that there is a limit to every patience, and it is time to put the jokes aside. A slightly agitated Count tells Angela to stop bending her line, while holding out his hand for her to get up off the earth. Angry Angela says her shoes are in terrible shape. Charvina had them custom made for her. The young Count says that her clothes look like the outfits that young girls wear. But for Angela it doesn't matter. She's not interested in who else wears this dress, she only cares about how she looks in it. That's what she asked the Count, how she looks in this dress. The Count thinks about it, but then Angela says that he doesn't have to answer, she doesn't want to hear it, and all because he thought too long. But he only managed to make a conclusion and a certain inference. He thinks that Angela is not the lady of the capital. This offends Angela a little, and she turns her back on the Count and tells him that she came from the village and traveled here for a week in a carriage. The Count again throws a careless phrase. He concludes that it means she came from far away since she traveled so long on the map, and that's why she's running back and forth like a colt. Angry Angela turns on the Count and starts yelling at him because not all country girls are what they think they are, and it's very insulting to her. She asks Mr. Hans Christian Andersen if he's always had such a character. But he looks at her puzzled and asks what's wrong with his character. But she tells him he's very blunt and picky, he makes fun of people. So it's a big turnoff. But the Count stands his ground and tells Angela that he thinks it fits her description, and she notes that that's exactly what she's talking about, the annoying taunting. At that moment the Count starts giggling. And already quite annoyed, Angela asks him what funny thing she said, To which the happy Count replies that he got a chuckle in his mouth, because he's had a lot of problems since he met her. But in retrospect he still realizes he had a lot of fun with her. To which Angela immediately responds by saying that apparently before she met her, Count Hans Christian Andersen's life was dull, to which he replies that like most aristocrats. The Count begins to talk about how his day was going. In the morning he goes on duty at the palace after the day is over to help take care of the family's affairs. Turns out life in secular society is a silent war of politicians full of false rumors. He thinks that's why he gave in to the sudden impulse. It seemed to him like a way out of the box to turn an ordinary life into a special story, which he put on paper. Angela, hearing all this, realizes that if you think about it, Mr. Andersen's eyes reflected sadness when he told about the girl with the matches. Hans is such a kind and good man. He didn't get angry when Angela behaved rather rudely to him. Not all aristocrats would tolerate such a thing. And although not that he was not angry at all, he certainly raised his voice, but still did not cross the border. Sarcasm is his specialty, and if there are many aristocrats like that, the perception of ordinary people from the people will be somewhat different. Looking at the Count, Angela says that he has such abilities, and he says that it was just a fleeting desire to free himself from the hardships of everyday life. In her eyes it looks pathetic. Of course she can't force him to write, but she is sure that he is destined to become the most favorite author of people around the world. A very happy Angela tells Count Hans Christian Andersen that she believes in him, while calling him Mr. Andersen. The young Count thought about it. He realized that this feeling was very different from what he felt when he was praised for his swordsmanship. Hans tries to brush off the praise by saying that he is not such an incredible man. But before he can even finish this sentence, Angela interrupts him and says that for her he is the most incredible and respected man, noting that he is even better than the king himself, His Majesty. The joyful Hans thought about it again, and realized that if someone had heard those words there would have been trouble. In his opinion they were very lucky that they were alone here. Angela whispers to Hans that it looks like they've come back from the bathroom. Hans turned to Angela, but she again whispers to him to look not at her but at the guard, asking him what they should do. The guard must be sitting down. Maybe he is waiting for someone. Guns brushes it off and asks Angela why she's still whispering. Because if she just talks quietly the guard won't hear. To which Angela replies that he's always so serious. So she wanted to play a little joke on him. The logical question arises, and how to be will have to fly all the way to the carriage. But in such a state to lift your air with the help of magic will not be very easy. Angela decides to part on that note, but asks Hans how about meeting tomorrow at the publisher's office. Hans says that's what you should do, but asks how Angela is going to get back, thinking at that moment that at least she's ever had an intelligent thought. Angela says she'll figure something out and immediately suggests that Hans tweak the terms of their contract a second time. The term of this contract is 5 years, and every day Hans will have to spend an hour or more with Angela for a cup of tea. He will create under the pseudonym he used before, but in the producer column they will write the name of her publishing house. Angela, without even waiting for his answer, says that of course he agrees and immediately hurries away from this very dangerous place. Hans replies that he doesn't agree at all, but Angela says goodbye to him as he leaves and says that on the way she will tell the guard that there is an intruder here, and then she will leave. Sitting with a pen in his hand despite Angela, Graf asks if he can report that he was threatened when signing the contract, to which Angela replies that of course he can, but only if he has to report today's incident. Angela asks the Count if he thinks the sentinel is waiting for someone, to which the Count touches his head with his hand and says he's just standing guard. But Angela says that since recently he has been looking in one direction as if someone should come from there, to which the Count says that it's normal to follow the fork, they just need to get out of here as soon as possible, taking Angela's hand. At the same moment Angela pricks the Count asking how a knight can so freely touch a lady's body. To which he replies that he did not think he would hear such words from her, and asks if she is often told that she has no conscience. Immediately the Count wrapped his arms around Angela from behind, whispering to her to sit quietly and not move while she understood absolutely nothing and wondered what was going on. But as it turned out the sentinel was just looking in their direction. Grav once again tells Angela to sit quietly, but she wonders whose heart is beating so hard for her or Mr. Hans Christian Andersen's. She could not understand it at all. And then at that moment when she turned a little toward the Count at the moment when he was embracing her their glances crossed. And the Count said that luckily the guard passed them by while the previously very talkative Angela just sat there silent. The Count looks in her direction and asks what happened to her, And where did her confidence go? Did she get embarrassed? Red as Cancer, Angela, dressed as Night Hans, started to blush very hard and didn't even look in her direction, but replied that she wasn't embarrassed at all. Hans and Angela are looking out from behind a large stone block. Angela thinks that she could never have imagined that she would follow the guard, also wondering what she was thinking when she suggested it, because the situation has not loosened up at all, but has become even more tense. Angela, as if nothing had happened, asks the Count where the guard is going and whether the Count is interested in finding out, suggesting that she go after him. Angela wondered what would happen if they were spotted, and she in no way wanted to put Count Hans Christian Andersen in an awkward position. She realizes that he's a writer for her publisher, an aristocrat first and foremost, and after all Andersen himself, while thinking that somehow she needs to get his attention. Angela asks him if what surrounds them is beautiful by asking him if the view of the environment is beautiful, or from here. The Count is puzzled as to what's going on. He looks at her and says it's just snow, and she says he's such a sugar. How is he going to write a story? To think he said it's just snow? He asks Angela, don't they see this every winter, with an emotionless expression on his face. Immediately Angela grabs his arm. She says she just wants to say that she likes surprises, while asking the Count a rather curious phenomenon, isn't it? She says that you never know what might happen in the next second, and the Count just stares and listens to Angela in bewilderment. She says it's a rarity that it happened to Croft when he was a student, or that his eyes fell on that girl when he was walking down the street. After all, it was through these events that entire stories were born, through these random and unpredictable events. The Count asks in bewilderment if Angela is now trying to say what's going on at the moment is the same situation, to which she discounts hands up and says that his life is subject to an uncomfortable and monotonous schedule, and so today with her he will deviate a little from the norm, and joyfully tells him that that's when the perfect and special piece of work will come out. A slightly disgruntled Hans Christian Andersen replies that he's such a deviant that if he's caught he'll just be sent to another state, to which Angela calmly tells him he's tense. Some kind of crazy writer says if they're unlucky they'll still get out of here even if she coughs up blood. Hans looked at her and created in his head a specific characteristic. She has no gift of persuasion, she has no ability to find a way out of a difficult situation, and when the smell of frying she prefers to flee for her life. But for some reason he feels as if Angela's words have ignited something in him. Maybe he will be able to get some useful experience out of it all. Hans suddenly takes Angela in his arms, from which she suddenly throws down, and asks him why he suddenly took her in his arms. But he did not explain anything and told her to just hold on tight. At that moment, Angela thought that he was going to go down like that. Angela says it can't be helped, and she wasn't going to come here, so she put on her shoes. It's a shame, but it's time to go. But Hans looks at her with a smile and says affirmatively that they'll see what happens and they'll stay here. Angela is of course shocked, asking him if he's telling the truth, to which he calmly replies that even though he insisted on leaving, he suddenly didn't want to leave the place. Some more pranksters. It's amazing a man who's never even smiled can laugh so heartily. Somewhere in the distance is seen a guard who at the post made a snowman. At that moment, Angela realized that it is never possible to understand what is in a person's heart. Both characters are very surprised. Angela can't believe her eyes, asking Hans if it's a snowman, to which he replies in the affirmative. The guard is talking to his snowman, telling him it must be warmer here so it doesn't melt faster. He says it time after time, but it's a very quiet place with no people or animals, just him and a snowman. Sometimes he thinks he's the only living person in the world, and that's why he made this snowman. The guard tells the snowman that he'll be right back, so don't let him melt too fast while leaning in front of the snowman. Angela could not even imagine that he goes to the snowman. She thought that he was waiting for someone. She was sure that he is secretly here with someone, meets someone. Many times looking at the snowman says that Angela was right because it is really just a snowman. The snowman is melting, which Angela notices. She told the Count that he was melting, to which the Count replied that although it's a snowy mountain, summer is summer here, it's not as cold as at the top. They realize that this is probably the reason why the sentinel is often not at his post. He is afraid that the snowman will melt, and comes to him every time. She picks up part of a snowman from the earth, and tries to put it back in place while saying that people don't want the snowman to melt when they sculpt it. As time goes by, the snowman seems to turn into a little kid, and people get older. It always makes me feel so sad. Angela adds that you want to admire your creation all the time, and in winter and summer it always happens. You mold it, and then suddenly forget about it. Then suddenly remember about it, come to visit, and there is nothing left of it. It melted all alone. But the Count doesn't see it as a big deal. I ask Angela what's the big deal. Because ice melts and turns into water, then the water evaporates and disappears without a trace. She says the snowman will leave at least some trace of yes, and hinting at his parts. She thinks it's sad. The guard is lonely, but he still wants to feel warmth. That's why he molded a snowman to talk to. He'll always be willing to listen to him, even if he ever melts away. And he'll be listening with a very big smile on his face, wondering if it doesn't make him feel like a kid again. Hans was a little sad and said that the atmosphere does its job after all. Nobody wants the snow to melt, but it's destined to melt anyway. It's very ironic. Angela notices that the snowman and the guard are both lonely, so they don't want to lose each other, and if the snowman falls, it will melt even faster. But Hans tells her that the snowman doesn't know feeling, and she talks about him as if she's talking about a living person. And then Angela explodes with emotion, asking if Hans Christian Andersen's knight. Hans Christian Andersen never thought of a snowman as his real friend when he was little, asking him to remember his childhood. The knight looks at Angela and answers that he doesn't know. She is very surprised and asks how it is. But he is a bit annoyed and says that he doesn't know what it's like because he has never made a snowman, so he can't answer her question. Angela can't believe there's a man who doesn't know what a snowman is. But then the Count makes a correction saying that he doesn't know. He's just never made one. Angry, Angela hugs the snowman and says how dare a man who has never made a snowman try to understand his feelings, specifying that even though he's Andersen, that doesn't excuse him. Angela tells the Count to sit down to make a snow globe and roll it gently in the snow. Then after doing all this she gives the Count the snow globe. Initially, the Count was squeamish about doing what Angela said. But after he did it, they saw a beautiful snowman. And even then he wasn't happy, saying it looked like a caterpillar. Angela was indignant, asking what caterpillar? And who was it that spoke? Was it Mr. Andersen who had so carefully sculpted it? She tells him that she saw everything and he tried so hard that he got carried away and made these huge snow globes. But the Count is still as nonchalant and says that he concentrated without even realizing it. But Angela noticed that he was shy and indicated this point. Also said that he avoids eye contact with her, to which the knight said that in no case does not do it. Angela tells the snowman not to melt, for if he's going to melt she's going to break him right now, with Count Hans watching from behind in surprise. He looks at Angela and asks her if he's right that she's threatening the snowman, asking her to at least take pity on him. Angela asks the Count if he knew that you can talk to plants, and the result will always be different. From good words they will grow faster, and from bad words they will wither faster. The Count doesn't understand why Angela is telling him this, but she continues her monologue saying that sometimes people don't behave the way the people around them expect them to, just like one of her acquaintances, while alluding to the Count. However, this is not the case with animals or things, e.g. animals follow humans because they give them love, and things keep their original appearance because people take care of them. And it is with such thoughts that she saw a snowman. She does not want it to melt. On the contrary, she wants it to stand as long as possible. She tells the snowman that even if she doesn't show up that he won't melt. And if he does decide to melt, it will be slowly. That's what she thought when she molded him. She put so much effort into it when she made it. It's not like it should be set up quickly. Angela asks Hans, who notices that her emotions are so genuine, like a child's. But if you look at it from the other side, she was still throwing the snowman. But she tells Hans whether it's a threat, a wish, or something else, she just wants her snowman and the guard's snowman to be friends for a little while, so neither of them will feel abandoned and alone. Hans notes that she's talking about the snowman again as a living thing, but she immediately replies that actually writers should look at things from a different angle. She thinks the snowman is sad and lonely when the guardian doesn't come to see him. Hans tries to say something, but she shuts him up, so she wants him to make friends with the snowman. The knight doesn't understand what's going on. They say that apparently she's a superb writer, to which she replies that she's just a reader with an extraordinary imagination, and it's all thanks to books. Hans says that it turns out she's read a lot of things. She remarks that this is something normal, because she is the director of the publishing house, thinking but not saying out loud that she was also the editor-in-chief in her previous life. The knight remarks that now it's time for them to leave. Perhaps the sentries will be back soon, and then they won't have much time for snowmen. Angela grabs his arm and asks him what he's talking about. They were going to the summit, or has he forgotten that their original goal was to get to the ice lake? The writer in her head realizes that things are not as smooth as they look, because her body is already at its limit, and she wants to go down. It would be the most sensible solution. But she realizes that if they leave right now, Mr. Anderson will have to go back to his boring life, and all she's doing now is for him. So even if it's just for a little while, she wants to be with him and give him a time he'll always remember with a smile. The Count looks at Angela and asks her if she's ready while taking her ring off her finger. Incredibly happy, Angela grabs his hand and affirmatively answers that she is ready, and the first thought in the Count's mind is if she's a puppy, because she's so cute. Welcome aboard, Angela, strap yourselves in, or no, just hold my hand, Angela said while Hans stood in a stupor listening to all of this. He takes her hand and says he will hold it as tightly as he can while looking at the writer with a very happy look on his face. Her assistant asks her, so she went to the ice lake, and the result of this journey was a contract with Hans Christian Andersen, not naming him by name, but by a pseudonym. She'd faint with a triumphant roar over something like that. Asking her what else she's done, the writer asks him who he thinks she is, noting that she's Angela, who made the booksellers respect themselves when they didn't even take her seriously. She jumped up from the bed with her hand up in the air, affirmatively saying that it's not like you can kill 2 hares with 1 shot. Her motto is grab 3 or more. Her assistant immediately calmed Angela down by placing a towel on her forehead and asking her to lie down, as this was the 3rd time she had jumped up like this. And then he asks her what's so good that she's so happy, and instead of answering her assistant, she answers herself, because she had seen and heard so many wonderful things, and it was really great to spend time with Count Hans Christian Andersen. She recalls that when she and the Count climbed to the top, he was very much surprised by the beauty of the ice lake, to which Angela at that point remarked that she had said he wouldn't regret it, and asked him to share his impressions as a writer. To which he replied that it was freakishly cold and surprisingly warm at the same time. Immediately in bewilderment, Angela asks him what is he talking about, and how can it be warm and cold at the same time? Without giving any affirmative answer, Hans said that he just felt that way, and that's just how he felt the first time he looked at Ice Lake. It's been noted that Angela did a great job. It may not have been the easiest way to get to the lake, but Ice Lake can melt the coldest of hearts. He also says that tomorrow they'll meet in a normal setting because he's coming to see Angela, noting that he has a story in his head that he'd like to write. Lying in bed, Angela realizes that the more she thinks about it, the more her face starts to burn, thinking it's because she's sick and has a fever, but she wants to go back to that day so badly. Her assistant sitting at her bedside asks how a person at boiling point can pull the blanket up to her nose. At the same moment she sneezes. Angela begins to make unusual sounds, from which her assistant falls into a stupor and wonders what it is with her from which she suddenly began to make such sounds. He says that he will call a physician because he can't just give her medicine. Angela in turn says that she didn't know what she would do without a helper, and that she should get better before the Count comes. Hans Christian Andersen is in his castle holding a map in his hands, thinking that it's not that he doesn't know the way because she even drew the map with her stiffened hands. He doesn't know how to deal with her stubbornness. But this time he can't break his promise. And that's when he unfolded the map Angela drew, and seeing what's in there makes him much angrier and leaves him puzzled. And if you want to know what happened next in the lives of the main characters, do not forget to write a comment under this video that you want the second part. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and click on the bell to not miss new videos, and appreciate my efforts by liking or disliking as you see fit. See you soon.